I'm Deb Mathias. I'm with the BUILD Initiative. I'm the director of the QRIS National Learning Network. Welcome to the 2017 conference, Expanding Reach, Enhancing Impact, Advancing Equity. One of the best ways to start off your full engagement in this conference is to make sure you've downloaded the meeting app, but I already know many of you have done that. I've been checking it out. That's where I was just on it before I walked up here, and that's where I got the rodeo goat thing. I'm like, wow, our conference attendees are at the rodeo goat. Anyway, it's within walking distance, perfect. For those of you that aren't big into this kind of technology, I'm going to move my slide. Okay, here I am learning from a friend how to use the technology. I've quickly found that even I can actually do it without the help of my grandchildren. I was in the top 10. My remarks say I am in the top 10, but I just crossed out the am to was because you all have been very busy on that app. It's a convenient way to create your schedule for the meeting, and you've got everything you need at your fingertips and everything that'll be happening. And within each topic, all the handouts will be there. It's a way to start connecting with your peers, see who's signed up for the app, and quickly send them a message or make a time to meet and get together. I saw that Karen from Texas was giving us a weather report for the state and for the conference building, and I appreciated that sitting in the airport on my way here. To do our part for the environment, we're posting PowerPoint presentations and handouts on the app, as well as the QRISnetwork.org website. Go to either location to download meeting materials. We will be continually adding more materials as session leaders send them along to us, but I've got to tell you, a lot are there already, and we totally appreciate our faculty for the meeting for helping us get that done, because we know these resources are used a lot in the coming year. Free internet is provided throughout the conference center, and you'll find the password in your meeting packets. All right. Reconnecting. I can feel the excitement in the room. Many of you are reconnecting with friends and colleagues, and I saw many first-timers in the app saying, I'm so excited, it's going to be my first time at the conference. I would just like to know, could we have everybody for whom this is their first Build QRIS meeting stand up? Just stand up if it's your first meeting. Now, those of you not standing, look at that group of people and make sure to seek them out later during the conference and help them become comfortable in our learning environment. Now for a little demographics. We're still not as diverse a group attending as we would like to be in our group here. It's overwhelmingly a group of white women. We'll talk about that very issue in many of our breakout sessions. How do we attract and grow more diverse leadership? How do we support a more diverse workforce? How are we becoming more reflective of the children and families we're serving? And speaking of diversity, we lost some of our colleagues from California at the last minute this year. A law that went into effect January 1st in California prohibits state-funded travel to states that have discriminatory laws on the books. This past Thursday, the California Attorney General declared Texas law discriminatory, so that Texas was added to the travel ban for people funded by the state of California. The number of states California is banned from attending on travel per diem from the state now equals 8 states. We're so sorry to lose approximately 60 participants and session facilitators from California as a result of this legislation, but we certainly do respect their point of view. It was expressed by Xavier Becerra, the California Attorney General, who said, "While the California DOJ works to protect the rights of all of our people, discriminatory laws in any part of our country send all of us several steps back." All right? We hope to be located in next year's conference in California and have our California colleagues back full force. We always get complaints that there's too much great content and it's not possible to attend everything we want to. So people have been meeting with their state teams, dividing up sessions, and then they meet again when they return home and reflect back on what they learned. Keep the conversation going back at your offices and programs. We've scheduled some state team times as a time during the meeting to get together and reflect and to elevate sessions and learning that is most germane to your particular state context. Many of you mentioned this challenge in the app. Some of the most amazing aspects of the conference in the last years were the networking, intense engagement between colleagues. Please make the most of this opportunity. Look at the participant list and find people you know and don't know, and seek them out, or get into the app and message someone you'd like to meet. Follow up with a presenter or other colleague who made a point in a session applicable to your work, or something that you wanted to noodle with them a little more. We're co-creating our learning together, and to that point, we have a whole room full of experts out there. Now, I'd like to turn on the house lights. I'd like everyone to take a moment to think about what they hope to learn and what they hope to contribute to the meeting, the give and the get. Now, what I'd like everybody to do, this is becoming a tradition, is to stand up and meet someone new and share your give and get with them, someone you don't know, and get your networking started.
We used to sing.
What a kickoff. All right. Well, let's keep that energy going through our next 2 days together. Share your ahas throughout the week via the app, Twitter, or Facebook. Let us know what you're thinking. Let's keep this dialogue going online, in your sessions, in the hallways, over meals. It's just so exciting to have everyone here. And now I'd like to move forward with my colleague Susan Hibbard from the Build Initiative, and take it away.
Thank you, Debbie. I want to start with just a little bit of thanks and then a little bit of context, and then we're going to move into our two great keynote speakers. I want to thank Debbie Mathias. She and Jerry Cobb, who's right there, our Director of State Services, organize this amazing conference each year and bring all of us together so that we can share our experiences, share what we're learning, and explore what we can do differently and come up with new ideas. The networking really is a tremendous opportunity, and I've already seen so many people talk about the experiences they've had in the pre-conference meeting. So I want to thank Debbie and Jerry for making it happen. And I want to thank the rest of the Build team that's here who've worked to put this together without too many hitches, we hope. And if you're in the room, I'd love it if you could stand up so that people know if they need anything, they can turn to you. Dara, I think most of you have met Dara Piltz. She's our amazing meeting manager and our meeting planner. Without her, I think we would have given up on meetings by now. We used to think we couldn't afford a meeting planner, and then we realized we couldn't afford not to have a meeting planner. So if she's not in here, she's always out at the front desk and really can help with just about anything. Then Jen Bender and Jonathan Chapman, they're our learning community manager and specialists. I don't know if they're in the room, but they too can help you with anything and have been getting us adjusted to the meeting app. Sherry Killens right here is our Director of Systems Alignment and Integration. And she, with Aisha Ray, one of Build's distinguished fellows, co-direct the Equity Leaders Action Network. And right next to her is Michelle Stover-Wright, who also is on the faculty of the Equity Leaders Action Network and the Health Equity team. Her primary focus is on documentation and evaluation for Build. And that really is so much of how we learn from you and from your work, making sure that we capture what you're doing and what we're doing with you and the impact. Carrie McCann is someplace in here. Some of you were at her earlier session on expulsion and prevention, comprehensive strategies to reduce and ultimately eliminate expulsion and prevention from preschool settings. She's, with Sherry Killens, lead our health equity work. And her focus is, she's the Assistant Director of State Services, so she works directly with states and also on early childhood mental health. Let's see, and then many of you might have met, and she'll be around also asking for video releases, Mariana Fleuret, our communications consultant, and she's been trying to help us move into the 21st century and use Twitter, which I did learn since the meeting last year, so now I'm tweeting. You'll see me out there. But I want to thank the whole team. Oh, Karen Ponder, I'm sorry, I forgot, our other distinguished fellow, who many of you know from her path-breaking work in North Carolina, but she and Jerry have brought to us, and now with Sherry Killens, a special focus on community-level systems development, and really recognizing that although we're focused at the state systems level, that people live in families and community and in neighborhoods, and to create a system that really supports two-way dialogue and feedback loops between community and states is critical to really having an impact on children and families, which after all is the point. So I want to thank the team, and an enormous thank you to our sponsors who are up on the stage. And tonight there's a sponsors reception this afternoon, and I hope you'll stop by each of their displays and talk with them about the work that they're doing in the field. Without them, we couldn't put on this meeting, and they're our great colleagues in the work of quality improvement. Most of all, I want to thank each of you. It really is an effort of engagement and sharing with each other. And so you are the people doing the work and critical part of the movement to support young children and their families. So I'm so thrilled to have you here, and please take advantage of the chance to talk and meet with each other. So those are my thanks. I also want to just set the context a little. Debbie jumped right into the meeting and the meeting app, but I want to step back for a second and introduce Build a tiny bit, and then our keynote speakers, who I hope will help us all step back from our daily work and just think about the context that we're operating in. I think a lot of you probably have seen this. Many years ago, Build and a huge group of national organizations and technical assistance providers who were working on birth to 5 efforts in states created this picture that we called the 4 ovals, although I've since learned that many states and communities call it the 4 eggs. And since then we changed it to 3, and there have been a number of iterations, but this was sort of the beginning picture that we had of the state work for young children that we were engaged in, that we were supporting state leaders to do. We think of an early childhood system as a system of systems, and the child and family serving systems at the core in our minds were early learning, health, mental health, nutrition, family support, and early intervention. We created, and on our website you can still find the Early Childhood Systems Working Group Toolkit to help states assess what they were doing in these systems and across these systems. And that work is still at our core. We know that this meeting is primarily bringing together people who are working in the early learning oval, but our work is always helping people to see how their work is nested in the work of others and connected, and how it can build upon, how you can build upon each other's work, and how strategically it really changes your work when you understand the relationship between your work and another person's work. Some of this is really logical as well. We know from brain science that the earliest years matter the most, that the brain architecture is developed then, and that positive nurturing relationships and supportive environments in those first 1,000 days are critical to the development of brain architecture. And we know that adverse experiences early have negative impact, but that also positive experiences can mitigate that negative impact. So the science has been sort of bringing to us what I think mothers and fathers and parents of young children sort of know intuitively, that you have a whole child who needs all sorts of things, from food, nutrition, oral health. If your child is having a tremendous toothache, it's not going to be a great day at pre-K. We all know that. And sort of this whole child, whole systems philosophy is what gave birth to Build. We also have a commitment to equity, and really particularly call out racial equity because of the role that race plays in the United States. And my kids were looking at the slide yesterday and had seen it a few other times, and we're trying to understand it. And it's hard to capture the perfect image, because equality here you can see giving everyone the same thing. We also have the analogy of the t-shirt. If you gave every person a t-shirt that was the same size, that's going to be good for some but not good for all. The reality on the right-hand side, shows what is our current state of affairs, where those who have started with many privileges and advantages get more and more and more. And that those with some opportunities get some more, and that those who have been furthest blocked from opportunity often are the ones who are least able to then receive any of the advantages of our policy system. In the middle slide, equity, and so my kids, and I think many others, look at this and say, well, why do you have the fence to begin with? So we're still looking for the right graphic, but we're also trying to make sure that in our simple 4 ovals, we're not leaving out some of the most important things about how the world works and how the US in particular works. This picture, which I'm sure you can't really see, is our a little bit more convoluted picture of our thinking. Children at the center of our vision, nested in family, that's the green circle, nested in community, that's a sort of orange circle. And then the state programs, policies, infrastructure is around that, hopefully supporting and augmenting what is happening at the community level in many different areas: care and education, health, social services, family support, family engagement, et cetera. And then you can see the pictures on the outside, probably the part that you can see well, all of the things that we know matter, but that we don't always take into account when we are just thinking in our lane. Transportation is an enormous issue. If there is a high-quality program or a great health facility, but you can't get to it, then it doesn't exist for you. And if you don't have safe spaces in your neighborhood, then the idea that there's going to be a certain amount of active play that will be good for you physically and emotionally, that too is not a reality. And the picture of a pregnant woman, I think, trying to draw our attention to, even when we think about prenatal care, that often is thinking too late. It's very important to be thinking about not 3-year-olds, not just 4-year-olds, but all of us, the family that nurtures the young child, and that means health care for the adults in the child's life, even before the woman is pregnant. Anyway, I just wanted to introduce you to Build in that way because we bring you together to focus on quality early learning and quality rating and improvement systems. But I think it's important for all of us to lift our heads up from the work that we're deeply engaged in and think about the context that we're in. So when I arrived late last night, I walked into the room and immediately right before me was an enormous picture of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And I thought, oh, no. Context can be hard to deal with, but we need to deal with it. And we know that there has been forward movement in all kinds of contexts. So we can't just say this isn't a time when we can do good things. We have to figure out how we need to do things differently to meet the context that we're in. So we bring you together to dig deeply into quality improvement efforts in early learning, but also to think about the context that we're in and what can we do differently to keep doing better no matter what the context is. Our context today includes, Mitch McConnell postponing the vote on the health care bill because it isn't good enough. So there's a ray of hope. We still have time to keep trying to shape the conversation and make sure that we don't lose health insurance for an additional 22 million people in the next 10 years, and that people really recognize not thinking about it as Obamacare or any other kind of care, but as people care, and what we really need to ensure that we're not doing something that's both immoral and terrible for people, but doesn't make sense financially either. So today, to help set the context for us, we're very excited to have two great thinkers and doers, Pedro Noguera and Celinda Lake. And we're going to hear first from Pedro Noguera, who's going to talk about the education context and the possible change strategies. He's a distinguished professor of education at UCLA, and his primary interest is changing the world with an emphasis on public policy and race. You gotta love that. I mean, no small thinking there. I think probably many of you have read some of what he's written. He's written a lot about schools and equity, and he's helped us think about questions of race and the role of property taxes, school segregation by race and income. Where are we in that? And why are we in the moment glorifying grit? How does that help, and what might that hide from our view? And he's thought not just about K-12 education, but also about the preschool years, the birth to 5 years, and early learning. So to spark our thinking and kickstart our discussions, I'd like to welcome Dr. Pedro Noguera.
No stairs?
Yeah, there are no stairs
No
there.
stairs, I gotta climb up.
Good job.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here at the Build Conference. I want to thank all of you for also being here, and thank Susan and the organizers for inviting me to join you. I've already been tweeting about it. I hope the rest of you are tweeting. Can't let only one person tweet out there, and it's important that even those who aren't here know that we're meeting and strategizing and thinking about how to make sure that all kids in this country have access to quality preschool and early childhood education. So I want to encourage you to keep seeing this as really organizing work, because as we know, we are one of few countries that continues to, at least amongst advanced industrialized countries, to not have universal access to quality early childhood education. That's a good place to begin for me with 3 stories that illustrate the problem. The first comes from an invitation I received to the National Governors Association. These are the governors of the country, and I was asked to come and speak about education policy. And I used my time with them to talk about the fact that while we've been fixated on the achievement gap, we've completely ignored the opportunity gap. Right? That is, that so much of the achievement gap is about the disparities in outcomes, but what we completely ignore is the opportunity to learn is not equitably provided, starting with preschool, and it continues all the way through K-12 and college. And the governors were listening and nodding, and I then pointed out the governor of Oklahoma. I said, there's a state that gets it right, because Oklahoma is the leader in providing access to quality early childhood education. And the governor of Oklahoma was there, and he started smiling. I said, why don't you explain why Oklahoma is the leader? Because that's not something that many would expect necessarily. Leader in lots of other things, but not early childhood education. He said, well, we've seen the research, and we know, and we have clear evidence of the long-term impact that it has on kids and their long-term outcomes. It's cost efficient to do so. And the other governors were listening. I said, well, why don't you share that research with them, because they must not have seen it. Right? And a few of them didn't even smile. But I think that's part of the problem, right, clearly, is that it's not simply about research, it's about will. How do we generate the will? One of my colleagues, Kathy McCartney, who is now president of Smith College, but before doing that, she was a professor with me at Harvard University, and she was studying the impact of early childhood education on children. And she was invited to a conference in Europe and was there ready to present her work. And some researchers from Italy were watching her as she was going through her slides, and they were looking at her slides. And they started asking, what is it that you do? She said, well, I study the effectiveness of early childhood programs. I said, the effectiveness? She said, yes. I said, oh, that's a very American kind of question, isn't it? And she could tell by the comment that that wasn't a compliment, so she said, well, what are you studying? She said, well, we're studying how to get the best early childhood education to all kids. Wow. Right? She said, oh, that's a different question. Well, think about it. The best early, if you want to go to the best early childhood education in the world, you go to Italy, right? And you will see the Reggio Emilia, and you see the Montessori, which were founded there. And the sad thing about both is that once they were imported to the United States, became almost exclusively available to affluent children, even though it was started with the poorest children by Maria Montessori, a physician, incidentally, right, in the ghettos of Rome. And so we have a problem on our hands. It's both political, because we don't have the will to do what makes sense. What the research shows clearly has a big impact, not just on the children who are served, but on their families, on our communities, on our economy. It's one of the best ways to reduce inequality that we have, right, is by investing in small children early. Right? But aside from the political problem, we have a practical problem in that in many of our schools and many of our communities, what we provide to children isn't even close to quality. Right? That is, in fact, in many of our schools, is little more than babysitting. And so the opportunity that's there gets lost because we don't pay the teachers or the workers what they should be paid. We don't provide the training that they need because we see it as a kind of babysitting, not as a real educational opportunity. Sometimes there's no curriculum, or if there is, it's a curriculum that is focused on regimentation, like teaching kids to sit still and listen quietly, right? Not to develop their natural curiosity. Right? And so it's not simply a political problem, but the ways in which inequities in our society influence what we actually provide to children. And that's my third story, because that's how I started in the field of education. I was a student, an undergraduate at Brown University, and not sure of what I wanted to study. And my father gave me the one requirement. He says, because he didn't get a chance to go to college. He didn't even graduate from high school. Right? Before I left, he said, just make sure you don't study something you could have studied for free in the library. Right? Well, when he found out later that I was studying sociology and history, he said, you could have definitely done that in the library. Right? But sophomore year, I was still trying to figure it all out, and I was very practical. I wanted to do something that I knew could have an impact, and so I took an educational psychology course. And one of the requirements for the course is that we do a practicum where we work in a school, and I was working at Martin Luther King School, which is about just a half a mile away from Brown University, one of the prestigious elite Ivy League school, but here I am, half a mile away, I'm already in a very poor black community. And I'm 19 years old, and I'm assigned to work with a pre-K teacher. She says, I'm glad you're here. I have 5 little boys that are giving me a hard time. I want you to deal with them. And I said, well, what am I to do? She said, just deal with them. For any time you come, they're yours. Okay. I said, okay. Now, I have no training, but I come from a big family, right? So I figured, how hard could it be? They're little kids. I can handle this. And right away, I realized that the issue is that they're very, very playful. They're so playful, they don't know when to stop, and everything they do is really funny. I'm laughing too, because it is pretty funny. But they're giving the teacher a really hard time. She's stressed. So since she's given me the freedom to do whatever I want with them, the next time I come to the school, I bring a football. Because I figure that I've got to get them tired before I can get them to do anything else. And so I spend the first half an hour playing football, and they love it. And so right away, I also realized something else, that if I form a strong bond, a strong relationship with them, now I can do anything. And lo and behold, within a week, I can get the kids to do things that the teacher could never get them to do. Because I realized that the goal was not to crush their energy, but to channel it, and that building a relationship with them would allow me to create a context for learning. Wow, that's actually research-based practice. And I didn't even know that at 19. And so I go there because I think we make this harder than it should be in some cases. And again, we're operating under many constraints in a lot of our communities and schools because we don't have the money we need to provide the training or to provide adequate facilities or to make sure there is a curriculum. So there does need to be real investments in quality. At the same time, I think all of us, any of us who spends time with children, knows that learning comes natural to children, doesn't it? What is the most common question amongst all 3-year-olds? Why? They want to know. That's a higher order question. Right? It's not a what question. It's a question that's trying to get at cause. Why? Why do I have to take a bath? Let's go there. Explain the whole sanitation thing to me, right? Right? Where does the water go when it goes down that drain? Explain that to me too, right? That is, they have lots and lots of questions because the world is a mystery and they want to know. Right? It comes natural to children. And if we can create environments that feed that natural curiosity, we know what Maria Montessori knew, which is that we have the possibility of generating kids or helping kids to become lifelong learners. Not children who are obedient in school, who are easily controlled, but kids who will independently, on their own, seek out knowledge and information, read a book, ask questions about the world and how it works. It's so essential that we keep that in mind. And then, as your own framework shows, recognize that to do that work, we've got to address all the other related issues like safety and family engagement and nutrition. Because one of the things we've known for a long time is that the unmet needs of our kids do impact child development, it impacts the brain's development, it impacts academic ability and performance over time. And so it's the holistic vision of children that's really critical to doing this work right. And that vision is often what's missing in many of our preschools and learning centers, either because, again, lack of training or lack of vision. And so I want to encourage you now, as you think about the kids in your community, the kids who are not in quality, the kids who are in need of this opportunity. What are we doing? What are we providing? Especially given that we now know that many of our kids out there are suffering from what we call toxic stress. Right? They're suffering from trauma. They're suffering from either direct or indirect exposure to a whole range of challenges and adversity that sometimes do impact things like impulse control. Right? Very hard for them to sit still, hard for them to listen because they're freaked out. Right? Their nervous system is shaky. And we know that the rate of trauma and exposure to trauma amongst children in many cities across the country today is as high as it is amongst veterans returning from war. The Child Studies Center in Chicago has been comparing the rate of trauma and toxic stress amongst children to that experienced by various returning troops, the National Guard in this case, from Ohio. And on several of the indicators, what you see is that the children have as much, in some cases, greater exposure. If I were to put a map of Chicago for you Chicagoans out there, up there, and I put a red dot where there's been a homicide, what would you see? You would see whole clusters in certain neighborhoods on the south side. North side, none. And what we know is that when there's a homicide, when there's a shooting, it not only impacts that child, that family, but everyone around who knows about it, who heard it. And so we know this is occurring throughout this country. It's not simply an urban issue, it's a rural issue. It's a suburban issue. And we have not addressed it. We've largely ignored it, even though the signs of its presence are there all the time. Comes in the form of kids who can't sit still, kids who are aggressive, kids who are just unable to handle what they've been exposed to at such a young age. One of the reasons why we have such high rates of suspension amongst 4-year-olds, particularly for black males, is because we respond with punishment to the unmet needs of children. You know, anybody who spent time in a school knows that if there are kids acting out, there are kids who are aggressive, there are kids who are difficult to deal with, it makes it very hard on the educators. All you have to do is spend a little time figuring out what is behind the behavior problem, and you almost always find an unmet need. And what we know is if you don't address the need, the behavior doesn't go away. In fact, it'll get worse over time. And when the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights documented that 1 out of every 3 black male 4-year-olds was being suspended across the country, that should have been a wake-up call to everyone that we are using discipline to punish children rather than as a means to teach. Right? Lawrence Kohlberg, writing about moral development of children, many years ago said the goal of discipline is not to teach kids to avoid punishment. To teach children to do what's right even when we're not looking. Right? Which means any discipline strategy is not connected to values and character. It's not connected to an effort to keep children connected to a sense of community. It's going to do very little to change behavior and probably end up reinforcing the very behavior we're trying to correct. And so I would say that a lot of what's wrong right now has to do with the way we see the children in our schools and how we understand their needs. And our policies have made it even more difficult to do this work. And one of the fears I think many of us have had is that we would do to 4- and 3-year-olds what we've been doing to older children, right? Namely testing them for the purpose of ranking them. Right? Because we've been using assessment as a weapon, not as a tool. The whole debate's gotten so off because, of course, we have to assess. Of course, we need to monitor. Of course, we need to know whether or not children are learning, whether or not they're making progress, so that we can intervene, so we can provide support. But the way we've been doing it actually reinforces our sense of the children's deficits. It doesn't build on their strengths. All it does is tell us these children are low. Now what? What do we do next? We should be using assessment to diagnose learning needs, to understand how to intervene, how to provide support. But our policymakers don't get it. And so that's the reason why, as educators and advocates, you have to re-educate the policymakers. One of the great opportunities I think that ESSA has created for us is it's pushed back some of the focus on high-stakes testing. And in several states now, there's an opening that's been created to try to do things a little differently. Will you be able to seize that opening? In California, we finally have an equity-based funding formula, which I think is a great move, except that many schools and districts don't know how to spend the additional money. Right? So the money's there to be targeted to high-need kids, but do they know how to use it in ways that will truly lead to impact? And impact is what we should be after. So much of what's been wrong in policy has been the way we've thought about reform. Right? And many of us know that every few years we got new reforms. Every time we get elected a new governor, put in a new superintendent, get new reforms. Right? Because we live in this country where we keep thinking there's a gimmick, there's some kind of quick fix we can use that will make our schools, voila, much better overnight. And it never works, does it? And that's partially because we do reforms to the educators, not with them. We rarely seek their input, their feedback for what's working, what should we be doing. We are much more likely to consult with a CEO of a failed corporation than we are with a teacher, right, when we design education policy. And as a consequence, we end up spinning our wheels. Right? Spinning our wheels and breeding a great deal of cynicism about the possibility for change and improvement. And that cynicism is widespread. And so I want to encourage you that when you are in your communities, whether it's at the local or the state level, to be a clear advocate who understands what really makes a difference, what really has an impact. And one of the things we know is that poverty is a learning issue. Poor kids don't do so well when you ignore their needs. And that's not because poverty is a learning disability. There's absolutely no evidence that poor kids can't learn, can't thrive when provided with the supports. But when we leave it up to teachers to also be social workers, to figure it out all on their own, we leave them overwhelmed and generally stressed out. And so we've got to be more thoughtful in how we approach this. New York City, for example, has decided they're going to go beyond pre-K. Universal pre-K, now they want to take it all the way down to age 3, and I think that's a great thing. But are they clear about how to do it to ensure high quality? Because that's one of the things the research shows. High quality early childhood has the long-term impact. Mediocre preschool combined with really bad K-12, not much impact. Not much impact. And that's one of the things, that many of the conservative researchers have said to us is, guess what? They've been studying preschool too. And they're saying, guess what? It has no long-term impact. Well, that's because you don't control for quality. Just throwing kids into any old program clearly doesn't. And so then we have to be clear, how do we make sure that what we know works, what we know about youth development, child development, is integrated into what we actually do, right, with respect to early childhood education. And here, I think, increasingly what the research is telling us is very, very important. The new research says that all kids benefit, but actually, disadvantaged kids benefit the most. Because in effect, what we're able to do with high-quality programs is to compensate for what families can't provide. Many of us have heard the study about the gap in word use, the 3 million, some say 30 million word gap. I have trouble believing that because I don't believe too many kids live in silence, but I also think that if someone shows up at your house with a tape recorder, you may not be as talkative, that's someone that you don't know. Nonetheless, all of us have seen lots of kids who come from homes where there are no books, where there's not an extensive vocabulary, a lot of kids are not being spoken to. Those kids come to school less prepared and have to have more enrichment, more stimulation in the learning environment. So how do we make sure that that is happening? Because if we're going to use preschool as a way to level the playing field, then the quality matters. We also know now that dual language learners have a huge advantage, particularly as it respects to the development of the brain. And that advantage, again, accrues throughout their lifetime. You just think about those of us who are fortunate to speak more than one language and the opportunities that creates. We're one of few countries in the world that still speaks largely one language, and in many places not well. Right? And we pass laws to make sure that's all we'll ever be able to do. Right? We're going English only, that's it. That's all we can do. Canadians, they think they could do couple languages there. I was in Little Curacao, average person speaks 4 languages: Spanish, Dutch, English, papamiento. It actually is in our children's interest. But again, we have to make sure that if we're going to do dual language immersion, that it's done well. We know that preschool tends to be highly segregated in most communities by race and class. And that affects not only the what they learn and how they learn, right, because the quality often is so wide, such a wide difference. One of my former students was describing, she was looking for a preschool for her daughter. She wanted a dual immersion program. She went to the public program, it's free, totally subsidized, and kids are learning to write their letters. She goes to the private Montessori school, and kids are studying snails and writing about it. Which one do you think she picked? The snails win, because those kids were happy, those kids were engaged, those kids were ready to learn, because again, they tapped into that natural curiosity. And so how do we make sure that we do use preschool and early childhood learning opportunities as a way to begin to correct some of the things that have added to the disparities that we now know are so deeply entrenched in our society? Because the achievement gap that we say we're so concerned about is really an educational manifestation of other forms of inequality. That is, the same kids that are at the low end in terms of academic achievement also come from the families with low income and poor housing and inadequate health care and poor nutrition. That is, that the disparities are multiple and manifold. And that's the reason why we need a holistic framework to respond. And what the research shows is that when we draw on an evidence-based curriculum, when we train the teachers so they understand early childhood development, we can have a huge impact. Here's one of the findings from the latest study. It says instruction built on social and emotional skills, rich play, toys, games, art, music, movement, complements explicit instruction focused on things like learning to count and matching letters to sounds and words. Both benefit kids for readiness in school. Think about that quote, because we've had this debate, right, for a long time. That is, should it be play or should they learn their letters? Well, some kids need to play and learn their letters, and guess what? You can play while you're learning your letters too, right? Right? And so, just that we, in the same way as we had a kind of silly debate about reading and phonics went on way too long to be finally realized, no, you need a balanced approach, right? We need a balanced approach with early childhood education too. And play's got to be part of it. Because, you know, one of the sad things for so many kids is that by the time they turn 5 or 6, they already don't like school. Right? Why don't they like school? Because the best thing about school was recess, and you already took that one away too, right? And so we've got to find ways to make learning fun for children, and we've got to still find ways to address their needs. So I don't have the 4 ovals. I have a different kind of chart, but it's the same principles. And it really draws on vast body of research. Abraham Maslow, what did he tell us about the hierarchy of human needs? Right? That if you want children to experience healthy human development, you've got to attend to basic needs for shelter and for safety and nutrition and love. Because without those things, it's hard for children to experience self-actualization. Right? And all we have to do is look at the children that are struggling, particularly as they get older, and what we see is neglect. Right? Schools that either didn't address the needs or couldn't because of a lack of resources. Schools that didn't work with their parents. You know, one of the things that we do least well at universities is to train educators how to work with parents, especially if the parent from a different background, speaks a different language, comes from a different community. Well, here's what we know, and James Coleman showed this in his research a long time ago. When there's partnership between school and home, kids do better. When the learning is reinforced at home, kids do better. But for that kind of partnership to be created, there's got to be trust. There's got to be trust. There's got to be a clear understanding that the people who work with my children care about them, love them, want them to succeed. That way we don't have to fight with each other because we're on the same page. We want the same thing. And so building that trust so that we can get parents to do their part in supporting their own kids, I think is an essential part of the work. To get there, we have to move beyond the kind of deficit thinking about children and their families. The deficit thinking which reinforces the idea, well, these kids have nothing, know nothing, and therefore the only thing we can do is to teach them to sit still and follow instructions. And I see that in many programs, public and sometimes private programs. But I also see schools like the one I visited in the Bronx not long ago, where children are, in fact, excited about learning because the people who serve them take time to stimulate, take time to know their families, take time to create an environment where children become self-motivated as learners. Visiting a school in Boston, founded by Debbie Meyer, the preschool at the school at Mission Hill Primary School, has a boat in the middle of the classroom, big wooden boat. First thing I wondered, how do you get the boat in here? He said, well, we built the boat in the classroom. Parents built it. I said, why? He said, because that's where the kids read. I said, you know what happens when you take a 4-year-old and you put them in a boat? They're gone, right? Because their imaginations are taking off. And they can't wait to get in that boat. And because they get in that boat, they want to read. And wanting to read is such a critical part of becoming an independent, avid reader, isn't it? Right. So what are we doing to create a context, to create an environment where kids are well known, where their families are well known, where trust permeates our relationships, and where the environment itself stimulates, challenges you, makes you want to know, makes you want to learn. And so over and over again, when we look at the schools that are doing this, they do have a commitment to equity. And I thought the charts that we saw a little while ago were helpful, because I think lots of people confuse equity with equality. And we know from education that we run the risk anytime we come up with a new term for it to become a meaningless slogan, right? No child left behind, that's a great one, isn't it? No child left, who could argue with that? Except that when Marian Wright Edelman came up with the slogan, because that's who came up with it, it didn't mean test the kids as often as possible. Right? She had something else in mind, right? Like health and nutrition and all the other things we know are necessary for child development. And so equity's got to always keep in mind child development. We need a holistic framework for understanding kids. And we need to understand that the emotional needs and the physical needs are all connected to the cognitive and the intellectual needs in a child. We also need to recognize that neuroscience is telling us, guess what? The brain, and you saw a slide on this, is like a muscle. It has to be worked. That's the reason why all children have to be stimulated. Right? Because the more we work, the more we stimulate, the more we build supportive relationships that nurture that development, the more those children have a chance to become self-motivated, independent learners later in life. Right? And then finally, we have great research that shows us that the context matters. The family, the community, all have bearing on the child's development. And the more we know about that community, the more we understand about both the threats, but also the opportunities, the assets, the allies in that community, the more we'll know how to work with that child and the family to help to promote healthy development. So equity can't be simply a slogan. It's got to be really rooted in something, right? Concrete. You know, I always say that anybody with more than one children practices equity already at home. Right? I have 5, so I'm an expert on equity. Right? When I used to walk the 3rd and 4th to school together, only a year apart, I would hold the older one's hand longer when we got to school. Not because I loved him more, but because he was shy. His sister was ready to go. She was, let me go, I'm ready to go play. As a parent, you frequently do that, don't you? You're making decisions. Which one needs the extra time? Which one needs the extra hug? Which one needs to be told, sit down, be quiet, right? Which one, you know? When we eat, my oldest son eats more than me. He's bigger than me. The 3rd one is vegan. no meat, no dairy. And the fifth one doesn't even like food, so you have to chase her down. Right? The goal is not to eat the same, the goal is to be fed what you need. And I think similarly, when we think about equity in our classrooms, in our schools, you can only practice equity if you know what those needs are, if you know who those children are. Some of our kids are ready for more. They're ready for more because they've been getting a lot at home. My daughter right now, 5 years old, the youngest one, that girl has the vocabulary of a 10-year-old. She can explain global warming. And frequently when she's on the playground, the other parents will say, you have a gifted daughter. My wife is so proud because, you know, it always feels good, right, to hear those things about your child. And then I have to remind her, you know what her gift is? Her gift is that she has two parents with PhDs. That's the gift. We confuse privilege with giftedness in America, don't we? Right? Lots of kids have gifts, but some gifts have to be cultivated, right? Because they've not been recognized and they're latent. And so equity means that we've got to do this work, and a lot of the work has to be about relationship building. Relationship building, that lesson I learned at 19. What the research is showing us, it actually can help in dealing with trauma. When you build a sense of community, when kids feel connected and safe with adults they know care about them, they are in a better position to thrive. They are in a better position to deal with that adversity that sometimes they can't even articulate and express. Right? They're carrying big burdens that they don't even have the ability to explain what it is that they're upset about. But if they know they're in a place where the adults and the other children are going to be kind and are going to be happy to see them, wow, what a great way to compensate for what they're not getting elsewhere. And so the research is clear. We can do a lot to make a difference for all children if we are clear about what the work entails, and if we are clear that if we create schools that excite our children into learning, schools like the one I visited in Baltimore, another preschool. She didn't bring out a snail, she brought a hermit crab. Had everybody's attention. For 2 hours, I watched children asking questions, drawing pictures, writing about the crab. And I said to her later, I said, why'd you bring the hermit crab? She said, you know, I could have brought a picture, but it wouldn't have the same effect. Right? Bringing the real thing, wow, a hermit crab is fascinating, isn't it? Especially if you're 4 years old. And so the thought we put into the work we do with our children will help us to create better outcomes. If we moved away from a reactive approach to discipline to a preventative approach, wow. You know what would happen? Our schools wouldn't produce delinquents. The school to prison pipeline is real. It's real because small infractions, small behavior problems in many schools become bigger problems as kids get older, don't they? Because we're not good at addressing the causes, and we're not good at keeping kids connected to learning and being part of a community. And so we've got a lot of work to do, because I think that until we start asking the right questions, we're going to keep coming up with bad answers. We've been focused on how to use education to close the achievement gap. What we should be focused on is how to use it to break the cycle of poverty. Think about that for a moment. And it shouldn't be that far-fetched, because many of us in this room have used education for that purpose. How many of you come from a family where neither of your parents graduated from college? Raise your hand. Look around the room, lots of hands. How many come from a family where neither parent graduated high school? Still a few hands. Mine too. Neither parent graduated high school. But my parents sent us to Harvard, to Brown, two to Berkeley, one at Cornell. All of us living proof. Your background does not have to seal your fate. Right? If you get an education that empowers you, and that's what we should be after. How do we create schools where kids are excited about learning? Where they come away inspired, wanting more. That's what a good education should do. So we've got to keep the vision on the whole child. Keep the vision about what quality work, and continue to be advocates. Advocates in our communities, advocates in our states. The governor of Oklahoma was right. It is a sound investment. Tulsa has had universal pre-K much longer than either Seattle, New York, or Boston. It helped they get private investment, but I'm glad they get private investment because we are too cheap and stingy with our schools. And we haven't provided the level of support that our schools need. And so we have a lot of work to be done. I believe that the future of this country will be determined to a large degree by what we do in our schools today. And what we do for our youngest children will have great bearing on what kind of adults they become. And so since you're on the front lines doing the work, I want to encourage you to continue to do it with courage, to continue to recognize that you are, in fact, a spokesperson for many of those who are not heard, for many of those who feel silenced, who feel afraid, especially right now. You've got to continue to do that work because our future depends on it. Thank you.
So I now want to welcome our second keynote speaker, Celinda Lake. Celinda is someone who I've turned to many a time. I was a campaign consultant for 20 years before working with the Build Initiative. She's a leading strategist for women, for workers, for children's and family issues. She's a Democratic Party advisor, and she's helped political leaders rethink how we talk about health care, how we talk about discrimination, how we talk about religious political extremism. Sometimes we can say exactly what we mean in the words that we want to use and be heard, and other times we can't. When Celinda helped us out in Maine fighting a discriminatory anti-gay measure, one of the things we ended up finding out was that if we wanted to win right then, the best thing to do was to put the governor's face on television and say, just vote no, question one. We never said what the question was about. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to educate everyone. We need to understand how people are thinking and how we might talk to them. So I thought it would be a great way to pair Pedro with Celinda to really hear what she's hearing and for us to think together then and ask them and talk with them about how do we keep our vision in place and yet speak in ways that we can be heard. So Celinda Lake.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Pedro so much. I was figuring this is brutal having to follow him, and then I've got all the bad news, he had all the good news. But then I realized if we had, Pedro, someone like you run for governor of California and then 2 years for president, we'd have only good news to talk about. So I'm ready to sign on to that campaign. But someone asked me after the elections, how are you feeling? And I said, I'm a Democrat, I'm a woman, I'm a pollster, I live in the colony of District of Columbia. How do you think I feel? What I want to bring to you today is the hunger and the mood that people have for the kind of vision and leadership and clarity that we just heard. So all of the data that I'm going to share with you, you can get. All of the data that I'm going to share with you is about the attitudes of real people. And all of the data I'm going to try to make this as upbeat as possible. One of the things I would, because honestly, and Pedro had it right, a lot of our problem is not with the public. A lot of our problem is with our leadership and our policymakers and the vision that they have. And the ones with the vision get intimidated out of it. And we don't look for vision in unsuspected areas like Oklahoma. And so I think that there is, hopefully this can, and a lot of people are exiting politics pretty rapidly, and God knows I can understand that. Now, one thing I would say, you may come back to me and say, well, that was very confusing because, you know, you said contradictory things. And one of the things we always say to our candidates is, people hold mutually contradictory views and usually deeply resent having it pointed out to them. So anyone who's looking for consistency should probably go get coffee right now and come back for the Q&A. But with that, and some good news and bad news. So one of the things that is bad news out there is that our country is very, very, very individualistic right now. Part of that is because People don't think they have shared fate or shared values. People think they don't have to go somewhere else to find problems. They think they can sit at their own kitchen table or go to the bar with their best friends and find lots of problems out there. In fact, we asked people, what would it be like to go to dinner with a bunch of activists? And people said that would be people like you. Because normal people would not be here in the dark on a day like today, okay? And they wouldn't have paid to come here. And people said, well, it would be very interesting. I would learn a lot. I would try food I had never tried before. It would be exhausting, and I would only want to do it once. So most people only want to have dinner with you once. That's a starting point. People also think very much that they don't need to have, one of the things they think about activists is that you always bring new problems. And that's good. We need Henny Penny out there, but nobody wants Henny Penny as their best friend, right? Henny Penny is exhausting and annoying. And people think, often we talk like we're trying to sell people a deck chair on the Titanic. And we say it's a crisis. And I think the global warming, and we do a lot of work in climate change and global warming, that movement really has that kind of connotation to it. We suggest to people you have to join our march because tomorrow is the last day on Earth. Well, realistically, if tomorrow is honest to God the last day on Earth, are you joining the march? Hell no. You're having sex with your partner, you're trying heroin, you're eating chocolate, you're taking your kids out of school and playing with them, but you're not coming to the march. That would be completely insane to come to the march on honest to God the last day on Earth. But that's what we try to sell to people. Now, what I thought was a real model for Pedro was the fact that our future starts today, not tomorrow, with the kids in our schools. People also think and get intimidated because they think, well, kids are kind of the private purview. What can I do? I mean, I don't think you're raising your kids right, but that's a very unwelcome observation. And in fact, one of the things we found is a record number of grandparents know the grades of their grandkids. And the reason for that is because they think their own kids are raising their grandkids horribly. And they know that that will not be a welcome observation. And so they think, well, I got to try to do something. I better find out how my grandkid is doing. So the knowledge that grandparents have of how their grandkids are doing in school is actually soaring, but not because of particularly positive motivation. When we ask people, how do you think the next generation will be? You will notice here that 58% of Americans think the next generation will be worse off or the same, and the same is not good. And 63% of the Americans think the economy is in poor shape. Now, if you thought the economy was in good shape, or you thought people were going to be better off, then you voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. But if you thought the people are going to be worse off, the next generation is going to be worse off, or that the economy was in poor shape, you voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, which is amazing. And the point is that people did basically a Hail Mary for change. And they're still not sure how that change is working out. And in fact, most of us in this room have a pretty good sense of how that change is working out. And it's hard for us to believe that it's only something like 250 days, and we've still got over 1,000 days left. Good Lord. Hard to believe. I don't know how we're going to survive it, honestly. But that said, we're going to tweet our way through it. And we're going to keep spell check on our tweets. But that said, people think, well, he hasn't had enough time and everybody's trying to block him and nobody likes change. So trying to look for a consensus here. Now, this is direction of the party. The direction of the country. Frankly, 2/3 of Americans think the country is going in a terrible direction. In the beginning, in 2016, the only people who said the country was going in a good direction were Democrats. Not because they actually thought the country was going in a good direction, but they thought, oh, this is a trick question. Our guy's in charge, we know how we're going to answer this, no matter what we think. For a while, the Republicans answered that in 2017 too. The Democrats have plummeted. They said The country is going in a horrible direction. That line that is just diving as fast as it can dive, that's Democrats. The Republicans said, well, we know this is a trick question, and we voted for change, and maybe we're going to get some good change. Now the Republicans are getting demoralized. The independents wanted to move to Canada to begin with for 10 years. One of the funniest moments of the election for me was when the election was called for Donald Trump, and the immigration website for Canada went down. It crashed. And the reason I know it crashed is because I was on it myself. So that was a poignant moment for all of us. But we're all stuck here now. Canada doesn't want us. And so we have to think about how we are going to make America better. Another thing that is happening with people that is very, very important for what you are doing is that in this national atmosphere of polarization and divisiveness and nothing can get done, people are turning to state and local government. And they are turning very, very much to state and local solutions. We have a record number of gubernatorial races up this year. And all the other statewide office holders, including superintendents of education in states that have them. This is an opportunity to really talk about state and local solutions. Now, granted, what we need is a national commitment here. There is no question about that. But there is an opening to talk about the linkage between state and local solutions and making a commitment on the local level. We do a lot of mayoral elections. And in fact, we did the neighboring election here of Houston, Anise Parker, when she was mayor for a number of years. And one of the things we found is that people want mayors who are involved in education. Now, Anise Parker felt very, very strongly that mayors should not take over schools, and that is not my expertise, and we have a whole education infrastructure. Well, the voters didn't give a damn about that. And to finally convince her that she had to have some economic profile, or some education profile, we did a focus group of supporters of hers. And we asked the supporters, what do you want her to do? And they said, we want her to do education. And Anise is already ordering drinks in the back room. And I was moderating the group, and I said, well, you know, the mayor has nothing to do with education. And the voters were like outraged. Well, she would have something to do with it if she cared about what we care about. So people don't give a damn about jurisdictions. They obviously don't give a damn about rules, and we can see that outbreaking nationally. They're kind of shaky on the Constitution. It's interesting because when we asked voters, do you support the Bill of Rights, 78% of Americans said solid, I completely support the Bill of Rights. When we gave them the actual individual 10 amendments, it's down to a third who systematically support the Bill of Rights. It's like, that's in there? I don't think so. That cannot be in there. No, no, no. That's not the Constitution. President Trump's favorability, very negative, but the favorability of Congress and everybody else is very negative too. And each party hates the other party. They barely like their own party, honestly, but they... I used to say that only the mothers of members of Congress like members of Congress. Now even the mothers don't like them. And Congress people won't go home because they don't want to go to town halls where they get hell, and they don't want to go see their mother where they get hell. So they're all sitting in Washington, D.C. People are very, I think both parties are failing them. So nobody thinks anybody has high ethical standards. People think the Republicans are too extreme and the Democrats are slightly more for the middle class, but they think everybody should be doing a better job, and no one is really delivering. And people are really, really tired of things that are partisan issues. One of the things about early childhood education, I mean, state legislatures try to make it and childcare, state legislatures try to make it a partisan issue, but I'm going to show you some absolutely mind-boggling data. And it's going to be really frustrating to you too, because childcare and early childhood learning, more popular than the 4th of July. Completely bipartisan. Now you can make it partisan, you can force the issue, but in general people are universally in favor of it. But they are seeing no leadership and no direction that says we can do this, and we can do this in this way, and we can do this. And people are as sick of reforms as educators are. They think there's a new set of reforms every 2 years. I can't even help my kids with their modern math. And first we have this and it doesn't work, and then we have that and it doesn't work, and people are just really frustrated. People are also, by the way, in love with educators. It may not feel that very often, But people love educators, and they love people that are involved in childcare and early childhood learning. And they want to hear what they have to say. Now, granted, we are talking about real people. We're not talking about the few Martians who are down here visiting. And so when you tell people what you want and what you have to say it in 9 seconds. Remember that the average 30-second soundbite is now 9 seconds. And even at 30 seconds, you're only allowed 76 words. So right now, as an exercise that I wish you would take home, when you're going to tell the public how to solve this problem, you have to have the clarity and passion of Pedro, and then you have to say it in 76 words, because that's all the time you're going to get. As I mentioned, people think that there should be oversight here, and that is not happening. People are worried about lots of problems, but the number one problem they are worried about is dissatisfaction with government and poor leadership. That's even beating the economy right now, and people think the economy is not right. What people are looking for is community leadership. And if there were ever a time to set an agenda at a community level by uniting at the community level and bringing business actors and teachers and childcare and educators and parents together, and if there were ever an appetite for that, and I'm not saying that's easy, it's now. Those community-type partnerships are testing off the charts. Here we have what's going to happen in the midterm elections. First of all off-year elections are over 50%, above 50. This election is probably going to be 56 to 58% over elections. Now, one of the things that is very, very serious about that is that the voters over 50 or over 45 are much more tax sensitive and much less directly involved in the education system or early childhood education. And what's bad about the education system is that when people don't have kids directly involved in schools, they don't go back to even their children's experience. They tend to go back to their own experience. So they are bringing very, very antiquated notions to the table. And while we call for increased investments, people think you just can't throw money at the problem. And we're throwing a lot of money at the problem, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. And Pedro would argue, and I thought it was quite eloquently expressed, that we are massively investing in our schools. But people think the number one investment that we're making in our states is education. I am committed to education. What is happening with that money? Why isn't that money improving anything? Why are our children doing worse? When people talk about other things that they are interested in, right now, of course, education funding is about to be cut in many states. How many of you are from states that have so-called budget crises, or real budget crises for that matter? Yeah. So you know you've been fighting. Education is being cut massively. The number one thing that people do not want to cut, education. The number one thing they don't want to cut is education. And yet it's the number one thing being cut at the state and federal level. Also Medicaid as well. So people feel completely voiceless because they feel my priorities are not being reflected. So it is a time with opportunity, but it is a time with great challenges. The last thing I will say, it used to be, so we think, okay, we're going to have trouble with some of the over 45 voters. Let's go to the under 45 voters. Well, first of all, the millennials are completely exiting politics at this point. We did some focus groups with millennials, and we asked them, what about voting? And they said, you know, sometimes you feel like you want to bang your head against the wall. Listen to this result, and you'll feel how I want to bang my head against the wall. So the millennials said, the first thing they said right out of their mouths, we're done voting. Done? Fucking A, you barely started. I mean, done. Excuse my French, but really, you're done? The second thing they said was, both parties are the same. Now, I agree that this issue is a bipartisan issue, and I agree that there are lots of leaders on both sides of the aisle at the state and local level. But really, you don't see a difference right now at the national level between the two parties? Are you kidding me? And then the third thing they said, and they held up their phones and they said, we can have more impact in half an hour on this than we can have all day long voting. And I am not underestimating the power of social media, and all of us should get much more involved as we're talking about this organizing in social media. But there is no comparison to the impact that you can have electing public officials who share the commitment and share the knowledge that you all bring to the table. So the millennials are exiting. The second thing that's happening is it used to be if you had a child, you got increasingly involved in your community. Now having a child actually correlates with decreased involvement in your community because everybody's working outside the home. We have record high births to single parents, and people are swamped and short of money. And so we're actually seeing disengagement when you have a child, even though your commitment to the community and to the school, et cetera, may be increasing. The notion that our salvation is going to come from the under 45-year-olds, and then the Generation Zs. How many have a Generation Z? You clearly do. Well, the Generation Zs are going to run you ragged. They are a trip, man. We have been studying them. I'm not even going to share the data with you, but boy, are you in for some surprises, and they may be delivering that already. So let me share with you, if we move from the general context, let's move to the specifics about childcare and how people see the policies of childcare. And the first thing is, don't talk about childcare, early childhood education as a commodity. We often, because we want funding, or we want something done, we start our conversation immediately with a program, an acronym, or we make it sound like a commodity. First of all, your mother should have told you, leave your acronyms at home. Very impolite to bring your acronyms out in the public. Secondly, programs work because they're rooted in values. One of my favorite all-time candidates used to start her speeches, I want to increase the Eisenhower grants. And we finally couldn't get her off of it. And we finally did some research where we asked people, you know, this senator thinks that we should increase Eisenhower grants. And these were people who totally supported her. And one woman said, I love her, but I thought Eisenhower was dead. What does he need a grant for? And Eisenhower grants are student loans, so it's an old name for student loans. But the point is, don't start with the program, start with the shared value. Because that's the way to inoculate against the opposition. That's the way to become a priority. That's the way to get people to hold on to what we were talking about. And Pedro's speech was an amazing example of that, constantly embedding the values in what we were going to do. So both Republicans and Democrats share 4 key values: caring for those who cannot care for themselves, including children and the elderly; accepting responsibility for decisions and actions; hard work and personal discipline; and equal opportunity for all. Now, the public's very confused about the difference between equity and equality. And honestly, what you all mean by equity, actually, they mean by equality. So we've got a little bump in the road here linguistically, because half of the public does not know what the term equity means. They think of it, and we were doing focus groups for NCLR, National Council for La Raza, on education opportunity. And by the way, the best testing message, and it so reinforces what you were talking about, was the message of opportunity, way overachievement. But we do focus groups for 2 hours. We'd been an hour into the groups. We said, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say the word equity? Now, we have been doing an hour-long group on education equality and equity. And they said, the loans that you have in your house, your bank account. And we said, after an hour? You didn't get that we were talking about education? So we've got some problems with language here. But some real challenges for us, but also some real opportunities. Core values. And I'll show you the data in a moment. But the number one thing that people believe is the number one thing that you want to promote. This is not a leap to say we've got to deal with the 360-degree kid. We've got to deal with the whole kid. People get it, that children need a safe and healthy learning environment. And those 3 words, safe, learning, and healthy, are very, very powerful words to people. That all working families should have paid leave, that every parent should have access to quality childcare and early learning for their children based on a sliding scale. 3 things about that. People want to attach quality to childcare. They feel very strongly about quality. Now, they have no idea what that means or how much that even costs. They do think that educator is probably central to it, but they really realize that there's a difference between babysitting and quality childcare. People also really, really want to connect learning. So always connect with the word learning or education or something, because people think 2 things. 1, that's worth more money. I'll invest more in that. And 2, that's a public responsibility. If it's just childcare, that's a private responsibility, a lot of the public think. If it's early learning, if it's early childhood education, oh, okay, there's a public component there. People also want accountability, and they strongly believe that there should be accountability to prevent and protect against fraud and abuse. Accountability, by the way, tests even better than transparency, although your recommendations for policies on transparency are very, very popular. But people like the word accountability even more. As one person said in a focus group in Michigan that we were doing, they said, you know, transparency means you get to watch it go to hell. Accountability means you get to do something about it. I'd rather do something about it. So accountability even better than transparency. People like a variety of options. And people also recognize, by the way, overwhelmingly in early childhood learning, and I'll show you that in a moment. People want to enact policies that are flexible, affordable, inclusive, safe, consistent, and sustainable. And they think all of that is really, really hard to do. As I mentioned, they want to include educational components. They also want to incentivize employers. People are nervous about where are we going to get all the money for this. And so they like the idea of employers, by the way, as well as parents participating. Sliding scale is a very, very important term here. Sliding scale increases dramatically the support for public investment in childcare, in part because people think everybody should have skin in the game. It makes it seem more affordable to people, more doable in terms of their tax dollars. It makes it seem less like a welfare program. And by the way, when we asked people where would you start the sliding scale, they said, oh, maybe a nickel a month. I mean, it's not that people want to, they understand that there are some people that are so poor they cannot afford much of a sliding scale, and they're fine with that. But sliding scale, are there folks here from Colorado? You all passed the initiative, and you know the power. Talk to those Coloradans. They know the power and the secret sauce of sliding scale in terms of getting tax-sensitive voters on board. People also want to handle childcare through deductions and tax credits. And you'll see some partisan differences, but they like the tax mechanism. People also volunteered overwhelmingly that they want to improve the pay for quality childcare workers. They do not think that childcare workers are getting enough pay or that educators are getting enough pay right now. People would like they would like flexibility, but they would like universal standards. They do not want this to be state-based, even though they've given up on the feds. And they do not want to let states opt out. And one of the reasons for that is that people think that as soon as this economy picks up a little bit, they will move to chase a better economic opportunity, and they want the same kinds of stuff available for their kids, or better, where they move to. 73% of Americans do not live in the same county they were born in. This is an incredibly mobile society that has been slowed down a little bit because people can't get out of their houses right now in this economy. But that said, people want national standards. They want to cover a broad range of family circumstances. They want job protections for their workers and increased pay. And they do worry if there's any kind of tax component. What does that mean for small businesses? America is in love with small businesses. And one of the powerful partnerships in terms of arguing for early childhood education and for early childhood and child care is to have business and educators in partnership together. Make sure small businesses are part of that, because America is in love with small businesses. So one of the things that you have been wildly successful in is over the last 10 years, we have seen a dramatic change in awareness of how much children learn in the earliest years. And this has taken off. People volunteer and know early brain development, early childhood development. They believe, so that all of these arguments that you want to make about the future is now, and that the investment has to start really young, the public is there. They really, thanks to your efforts, know that. They would like, at overwhelming levels, to deduct expenses for dependent care and tax credits. And you'll see some partisan difference in a moment. Notice 84 to 88% of the voters favor those, 2/3 favor them strongly. Just remember, every time you are faced with an asshole legislator who says that you cannot do this, your program is significantly more popular than theirs. Now, they have the vote, but just remember, you're more popular than they are. These are also bipartisan policies. We constantly talk about, and this was a bipartisan study we did with a Republican pollster. These are policies that Democrats, Independents, and Republicans support. Now, Republicans do like a little bit more deductions than tax credits, but the differences are at the margin. These numbers are astronomical. They're in the 80s and 3/4 plus. There's no politician that gets elected with numbers like these policies would get elected if they were ballot initiatives. People also like direct financial assistance for childcare and early learning on a sliding scale. Sliding scale picks up anywhere from 10 to 20% support for that, and increasing pay for childcare workers. Now, we put in there tax credits or tax deductions for at-home parents. We thought that would bring on a lot of more religious, more conservative voters. People like that. It's actually Democrats who like it more than Republicans. African Americans are the ones who like it the most, but it doesn't particularly pick up Republicans. So popular, but not essential. And then we tested turning something from a yearly benefit into a monthly benefit. And in the focus groups, people really liked that idea. But in the survey where they didn't have time to think about it, they were much more reserved, particularly Republicans, who said it kind of reminded them of welfare. People overwhelmingly prefer extending childcare on a sliding scale than picking an income cap. First of all, number one thing, Americans are terrible at math, okay? That's something you should fix for young Americans. Americans are terrible at math. My favorite example of this is when we were doing work on abortion, and we were talking to men about abortion, and we were talking trimester, and one guy raises his hand and says, well, I just have one question. How many trimesters are there in a pregnancy? And nobody said to him, you're an idiot. Tri means 3. Everybody said, yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. So maybe Americans aren't very good at biology either. I don't know. Maybe this is a great explanation why we have so many unintended pregnancies. That's all beyond the scope of my research. But the point of the matter is that Americans are terrible at math. The other thing is when you get into these numbers, it stalls people out. It moves them to the side of their brain that is more analytic, away from the empathetic side of their brain. And they get stalled out because they're trying to calculate their own income and what is it before taxes or after taxes. They don't even hear the stuff that you say afterwards. Every once in a while, you can get a number that is so powerful that it acts like a metaphor. So one great example of this, we worked in California and we were working on gun control, and we said there are 16 times more gun dealers than McDonald's in California, and we need to close the gun show loophole. And people were like, oh my God, that's unbelievable. You mean I pass 60 gun dealers before I get my Big Mac? And we said, no, we said 16. And people go, 6 times more gun dealers than McDonald's? It wasn't the number. People were all confused with the number. It was the metaphor that mattered to people. So do not bring in a lot of statistics. Bring in your values. Bring in solutions. Do not bring in a lot of statistics. It will not win people for you. Core values. What are we aspiring to? What's our goal here? Notice that increasing pay for child care teachers and providers will increase the quality of care. People overwhelmingly believe that. They also believe simultaneously, and here's where, if you were looking for consistency, that would be the hobgoblin of little minds. So people simultaneously believe that people should be responsible for their own families and not look to the government for financial assistance, and that government should help families afford the cost of child care and early learning, and see nothing contradictory about that. Now, different people believe different aspects of it. The Democrats tend to believe in the government one, the Republicans tend to believe in the personal responsibility one, but the independents, who are our key, believe in both equally. The other thing is people talk a lot about arguments against child care investment, that we don't have the money for it, that we don't, that it's not a priority, et cetera. Actually, the deficit is one of the biggest problems for us. And one of the things that was interesting is being able to cite business leaders or conservative governors who say this is a worthy investment that will pay off in the future in ways that we can't even measure now. because people are worried about their state deficits and they're worried about the national deficit as well. Two arguments that we used against, or one on paid leave, which we'll skip over, tax dollars. Our tax dollars should be spent on other priorities, Homeland Security and the military. Homeland Security and the military are the two biggest commitments that people have for federal expenditures. You will notice by 20 points, people said, I don't agree with that. No, we can afford child care. I don't agree with that. Yes, we got to keep the military and Homeland Security, but that's not the same thing. So hopefully, there are many things that are very positive in this presentation for you. It is your time. Because of the hard work that you have done, people believe in what you believe in. They have a lot of this storyline in their heads. It has not gone unnoticed. The power of early education, the early brain development, the connection that we all have to this, the value of a safe, healthy learning environment for every child and our commitment to that. The fact that this can make a long-term difference, that we can afford this, that child care workers need to be paid more, and that quality child care costs more. All of this, that storyline, the building blocks are there. There are some formidable barriers, and we sometimes get in our own way because of the way that we articulate things. But the point is to create momentum at the local level that will be felt in the state legislatures, at the governors, and ultimately nationally. Because the people are with us more than the policymakers, to be honest with you right now. So thank you for that, and I look forward to your questions.
I know that when Pedro was talking about some of the schools where he's seen, promising practice, teaching and learning that engages the young child, I'm wondering, what it took to get there, and I'm wondering simultaneously, Celinda, I guess it's that contradiction that worries me about how people feel about individual family responsibility, and yet the role of government. And I'm wondering particularly about the playing field, people understanding sliding scale, and yet do people really understand, forget the words, it doesn't have to be called equity, but the fact that we're not all starting in the same place, and the advantage that your children have of two PhD parents, do people really get all of the differences that factor into who's being disadvantaged and who's being privileged? So those are a mixed up set of questions, but I'm wondering if you two could both talk about some of those things. Like, what does it take to help make the change and deal with these contradictions? Was it a local, what happened in the schools, for example, that you were talking about? Was it a local leadership, or?
Yeah, so first, I really enjoyed Celinda's presentation, and I want to reinforce the point she made about values being the key, and speaking about the values, and even the stories, because to me that, and I know this from doing a lot of public speaking, people will remember the stories way more than they'll remember the statistics, right? So, the sad thing about the stories, though, is I can name a classroom in many communities where I see amazing things going on, but it's very idiosyncratic. It's because that teacher has that commitment. She brings in the hermit crab. Next door, they're drilling the kids, right? So that's, I think, the problem about quality and consistency that I still see out there. But at the same time, I think if we remind people that quality does exist, and that what we need to do is figure out how do we spread that around so that that's what we're focused on, that resonates with people. Many people have had that experience, and that reminds them of the power that teachers can have. So, but you have to connect with people around a critical value that they hold dear, and those values often do cut across our differences. Right after the election, I spoke to school board members in, so over 1,000 board members in Oregon, and the same thing in Iowa. Most of those are Republican, and just about all of them are white. And they respond to this message about opportunity. That is a message, and I think we do need to figure out how do we speak to people who don't just think like we do.
So it's a really good question, and I think that there are three-part answer to it. One part answer is to remember that whoever sets the frame wins the debate. And if the facts don't fit the frame, people don't reject the frame, they reject the facts. Again, going to my friends in climate change, the public is completely convinced that the scientists are divided on climate change. Okay, well, 935 to 1, and you call that divided, okay. But the public's absolutely convinced because the right has set that frame. So part of this values conversation is saying what the frame is, what we are going to do. And if we start out with a frame that talks about early childhood learning and brain development and how it makes a difference for all of our futures, if we start out with every child must have a safe and healthy learning environment, we must be committed to that. We can get that done. Then I think some of these, and then somebody coming in saying, well, yeah, but it's the parents' personal responsibility. Okay, well, the parents have an important role, but I'm not leaving it to Pedro. I mean, I'm not leaving it to Pedro. We're going to be committed to this. We can get this done. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is I think the Republicans don't talk enough about the role of government, and the Democrats don't talk enough about the role of parents. Even though I think a lot of progressives and liberals totally understand that and totally understand the great privilege of being a gifted child with two parents who went to college. And so I think that what is really important here is that we involve more of each other's side in that. And there were, and there still are at the state level, a lot of moderate Republicans who firmly believe there is a role for government here and like those school board members. And similarly, a lot of progressives who totally believe, of course, the parents are the first teachers, which, by the way, tests off the charts, and also teaching the parents to teach. I mean, I thought you said it was interesting that we don't teach the teachers how to react with the parents, which is a very interesting notion. We also don't teach, we don't have the time to teach the parents how to become great first teachers for their kids, which most of them want to be. Then the third thing I would say is, and this was going to be my question for Pedro, so just hypothetically assuming that we are, you know, there are 36 governors out there, they're going to take your plan for early childhood education, but they have to be in the 30-second soundbite world, and they have to say specifically what they're for, what they're going to do. What should the people who are running for governor in Iowa and New Mexico and Alabama say that they want to do to make this happen in their state?
So I got asked this question,
Oh,
almost
good.
a version of this question, with the governor of Colorado on the panel. Former Governor Ritter, right? The Coloradans should know him. And they're saying, well, you're talking about early childhood education, expanding it, how would you pay for it? I said, well, there's only one easy place to take the money from, the prison system.
Yeah.
Right? Because half the people there are there for nonviolent drug-related offenses, and it doesn't make any sense. And Ritter, who had been I think he was the district attorney for the state,
right,
said he's absolutely right, and that's what we should be doing. He was also leaving office, so it was too late to, but I think, you know, this is where not being in public office allows you to say things that people who are in public office a lot of times are too afraid to say.
Right.
But we need some new thinking about, we're investing in the wrong things. We're investing in locking people up for stuff that most countries wouldn't even lock you up for. And meanwhile, we're not investing in children and families.
Which
know,
then
one thing,
has an impact to the prison pipeline, has an
Right.
impact, so you didn't need that money.
One thing, Governor Pedro, that I think I should tell you is, because we're signing up, right? You got, you know, here's your small donor network right here. That is wildly popular with the voters, by the way, wildly popular with them. And we have gotten, are there folks from Kentucky out there? Because you guys know, there are Republican legislators who feel like we can't afford these policies. Whether they're right or wrong, we can't afford them anymore. We can't build a whole nother prison. The other thing, by the way, that's really interesting, and you were great at this, when you give the examples of the 3- and 4-year-olds and the kindergartners and the 6th graders, and the 6-year-olds, people are afraid of teenagers. And a lot of people don't even like their own teenagers every other day, which I noticed you laughing at. But I remember we did a focus group on the suspension of little kids. And the public's appalled, and one white woman, upscale suburban white woman, Republican, threw her hand down on the table when I was moderating the group, and she said, gosh darn it, this is the United States of America. You cannot fail kindergarten in the United States of America. That is just un-American. We are not going to do that. And people just think these little kids, I mean, come on, we must be able to do something different here. Yeah. So they're really, this is where I would say, you know, there's so many, the thinking is so dated where we assume, make all these assumptions that are actually wrong in terms of where the public is at.
What people think. I see, whoops, sorry, I'm violent. I see that we have some people here lined up at the mic. Who's first?
Hi, my name's Robin Friedner-McGuire. I'm from Vermont, and yeah, Vermont. Bernie is from there, by the way. Just saying.
Most popular politician out there right now, just saying.
So it was an incredible pleasure to listen to both of you. I'm a part of a public education and engagement campaign, and we are advocating for high quality, affordable childcare. And we suffer from what you talked about, that there's incredible agreement on this issue, but there is lack of leadership on the issue to the level of what we need to see real change. And so one of the things that we've been talking about, we are currently a C3 organization. We're talking about and considering forming a C4 organization so we can expand some of our electoral work and forming a PAC as well. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, if there are other states that have done that and what you've observed. And then the second question is, do you think that we're going to have to resort to more of a judicial strategy across the state to get to where we need to go?
Well, let me answer the PAC. I don't know enough about the legal strategy, maybe Pedro does, that I can't really answer whether there's a judicial strategy would be a substitute. I would say three things. First of all, I think a PAC is a great idea. And just so people can look, are there any states, are any of you involved? Will you hold up your hand so people can pick your brains? Any of you involved in, do any of you have C4s attached to your organizations? Oh my goodness, all right, well we need a workshop on this. Okay, so Harriet down in front.
Some of you do have that, so write it in the app so people can find you.
So the second thing I would say though, and this is just, I will take a moment of personal privilege. Everybody in this room, everybody on every issue in this country must be for campaign finance reform. This system that we have right now is rotting our country out. And yes, you should establish a PAC, but you should also work to do away with the need for a PAC. We must get that done. And I don't care what your issue is, we must get that done. Because these candidates, one of the reasons they have warped priorities is because they're spending their time 6 and 8 hours a day talking to big donors, and those donors tell them what to believe in, and they're worried about independent expenditures against them. It's rotting the best of them out. The second thing I would say is that I think that we are lacking leadership, but one of the things that I think is, there are two things that you could say to elected officials. One thing that you could say to them, and in both of our presentations is some great language, poll on this. Don't believe our polling. Poll on it yourself. You're worried about this, you're scared about it, have your pollster write a question on this and you see if it's popular. I guarantee you it's more popular than most politicians think. They have no idea, and they're scared to death of the tax part, they're scared to death of the priorities part. Poll on it. Don't trust us, poll on it. Look, and there's some questions you already have that you can hand them. See in your own polling. And then I do think that a lot of elected officials, both, they're not running for superintendent of public instruction. They got a 9-second soundbite to deal with. They don't like that either, by the way. And so great answer on where the money could come from, and that's a great step that is very popular in many states. But the second piece of it would be also just, okay, what are the 2 bills I'm supposed to introduce? What are my first, if I want to move on this, what are the 2 bills that I send down as governor to the state legislature? What is the first bill that I introduce when I get to Congress? And a lot of these elected officials really don't know what that is. So providing that at your state level, say these are the 2 concrete changes that would make a huge difference, I think would help them a lot, because a lot of them just have no idea what they're supposed to be doing.
I know a lot of times we're in these conversations and we're talking about things that we say need to happen, but we think they're never going to happen. But I think one of the key things for me is when you've got child care, pre-K, Head Start, early Head Start, we've got all these things that are caring for the same age children, trying to accomplish the same things, and maybe it is due to funding that we have those titles, but when do we decide if we know that child care is seen as babysitting, when does our build, when does our NAEYC, when do our local affiliates start using a terminology that we can all embrace and help the parents and the large community understand that we're still talking about the same children. We're still talking about the same thing. So can it be early childhood education? Can it be early care and education? Can it be early educators? But I think we've got to start somewhere, because my frustration might not look like it, but I've been in the field for 30 years, and I'm like, we moved from daycare to child care. So how do we move from child care to something else? I think it's time.
Oh, you answered that.
So, and I have to go soon.
Yeah, I know.
But here's a lesson that I saw. Both San Francisco and Oakland adopted, several years ago now, a Kids First initiative. And it called for 5% of the general fund to be dedicated to children, services for children. It quadrupled the amount of money available. Not a single politician endorsed it, but it took off amongst voters. And I'm just surprised it hasn't taken off in other places. Because if you don't have funding, then you can't do quality. And if you say, if you speak to the values involved about the importance of investing in children while they're young, that does resonate. So, but I do think we need strategies that get the funding to the initiatives so we can address those needs.
You know, one thing about those 5% initiatives, by the way, two things. First of all, there are 43 mayors up this year. So thinking about talking to your mayors about, you know, promising that or running on those initiatives, very, very popular with the voters. There were several pollsters involved, but we were one of the pollsters involved in San Francisco and Oakland. Actually, the biggest problem we had with 5%, some people thought it was a cut. They thought, that's too low. What are you talking about? That was our biggest problem with it, not opposition to it.
Right.
Do you have time for one more?
I have time for
Okay,
one.
We can keep talking, but Pedro definitely has to run catch up and so
Okay.
does Celinda. Yep.
My name is Katie Emerson Haas, and I'm actually I live in New York, but I'm working on a national initiative to transform teacher preparation. But I recently ran for my local school board, which
Good for you.
And thank you.
Did you win?
I did. I'm on the board.
Awesome.
And we're actually, I think, in a pretty good place, but some of the questions that came up were about early childhood and early childhood programs, and I was very clear that I was not interested in having an early childhood program that looked anything like kindergarten. And so I'm wondering sort of what we know about, I mean, it's great that so many people are interested in early learning and brain development, but I think the story that Pedro told about the differences in the classroom, I'm wondering sort of what we know about people's understanding of quality.
Oh, that it's zero. But the other thing we know about it is, I mean, they do think creativity. They really want to promote creativity and imagination. They don't want to test the kids to oblivion. But they also don't feel, honestly, like they have to micromanage it. They don't think that they have to know what every detail of it is. They are a little disempowered because they feel, and it was interesting that you automatically went to this in your answer, that part of the real creativity and quality is a great teacher. And how do you get a great teacher in every classroom? But they know nothing. It would be great if we could give them 9 seconds worth of indicators on it. Most of the explanations I've heard have been quite a bit longer. But also know that they don't feel like they need to micromanage it either. We asked people, how do you know if a kid is succeeding at school? Do you know the number one indicator they said? And it was interesting, you used it automatically in your speech. The kid's coming out of school smiling. And we thought, are you kidding? That's like how you're really going to assess it? And they said, well, I wouldn't test the magnitude of the kid's smile, but yeah, that's how you know if a kid is learning if they're smiling. So the public's a lot more there and a lot less second guessing. It's the legislators who will drive you crazy about what's that boat doing in the classroom. And isn't there a sanitation problem with a hermit crab in there?
But, you know, I just want to agree again with Celinda. You know, I have to say, if our kids get high test scores but get strung out on drugs, we still failed.
Right, there you go.
That is so much more to educating a child than what the test scores are. And people get it.
They totally
Happiness
do.
does matter. They don't want kids walking around depressed. And so I think we just have to speak in a language people get and address their real practical concerns. I'm really convinced from spending time around elected officials that most are not leaders, they're actually followers.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do is generate the sentiment to influence them.
That's right. Well said.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Henderson.
I know
Good
that.
to see you.
All right.
Thank you, Susan. So great to see you. Thank you, my friend. This is
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.